Okay guys, thanks for coming to another Niagara Broadsword Academy Thursday night lessons. We're going to get started right away. Hopefully you guys are already warmed up and stretched out a little bit, and we're going to jump right into the meat of the questions. So today we're going to be dealing with the rock, paper, scissors model of fencing, otherwise known as the combat wheel. There are other names for it. The basic principle is pretty simple, and then in practice it's a little more complicated. But let's keep in mind that this is not necessarily a canon of fencing. It's a paradigm through which you can understand how to approach a fight, but it's not necessarily the be-all, end-all, and the only way to fence. And it was developed a little later in the period. It's not something you would find early on in the combat or martial period of fencing, but rather it's more of a sport outlook. So the basic principle is that you can categorize any kind of play or movement that you're making in broadsword fencing into one of three categories, and that those three categories, like rock, paper, scissors, each have a weakness and have a strength. So the three categories are parry ripostes, deceptions, and timing attacks. And in timing, we include distance and everything else according to Silver's paradigm. So anything that has to do with receiving a blow and then performing an attack afterwards, or vice versa, making an attack and doing a certain evasive action after, or anything that relies on deception, or anything that relies on having a very particular distance, or timing, as in actually being literally faster than your opponent, or using a part of your body like your wrist when your opponent is using the arm. So I'll give a couple of examples to get started here, and then we'll work through one example of each, and we'll also discuss how best to work through all of these things while we're studying on our own. So the first thing that we're going to do is parry riposte. Parry riposte is the simplest concept to get a hold of, and it's the simplest thing to employ. Now, typically we encourage you to start with parry riposte all the time, and just try to use parry riposte only in your fencing until you develop skills elsewhere. So in our beginner lessons, we start you off with the concept that you should always receive a blow and then make an attack, and receive a blow and make an attack. And this, at its very essence, is the concept of parry riposte, right? You're parrying in time, in distance, you're riposting with exactly what you're telegraphing and exactly what you're intending. You don't have any sort of deception, so you're just parrying on inside guard and attacking with a number 5, for example, like that. So that's all we're doing, parry on the inside and then attack over the opponent's sword, just like that. And it's very simple. So this is why we get you guys started with simple parry riposte, so that you guys can get that going, and that's all you got to do. So parry riposte, very straightforward. Now we'll discuss deception, and then we'll discuss timing, and we'll discuss how they link with each other. So deception, simply put, and the easiest deception we're going to work on right now is a feint, which we went over previously in one of our other videos. And the way that a feint works is that you telegraph an attack against your opponent, and then you make a different attack, or possibly the same one. You wait and see what happens. So if we receive an inside guard, for example, and then I come over the top of the sword as if I'm going to make a cut number 5, but I may not choose to do that. So I telegraph this intention, and then I wait and see what my opponent does. If my opponent tries to guard on that side, then I hit over there. So that's the simplest way to understand a deception. You intentionally come over here and wait for your opponent to make an action, and then if he doesn't guard himself, you make the proper cut, and if he does guard himself, you make the reverse cut. So that's the simplest deception, just like the simple parry riposte. Now, the last one on timing is we're going to use a timing cut that is specifically good against that one, which is a quick chop of the wrist, and you're going to come up over the opponent's sword like this, and you're going to drop the point down on top of them. What that does is, if their guard is guarding you well, you rise over the guard, and then you can chop through the guard. Okay, so you're middle of the sword against middle of the sword on the outside guard, for example, and all you're doing is raising your fort up so that they can't defend, and then you're cutting them on the same line. So you're on the outside guard here, you raise it up and cut. And so that is timing attack, because it relies on the speed of your hand, it relies on using a cut of the wrist when they have to make another movement, possibly of the body, to get out of the way. And it relies on you being just actually physically faster than they are and getting that shot out faster than they can react. So there we have our three basic principles. We have parry riposte, deception, and timing. So how do they interact? Well, that timing cut is going to come in specifically against that deception. For example, if I receive a blow on the inside, or I'm standing in my inside guard, and I make a deception here to cut on this side, and I wait, if my opponent is quite fast, I may have exposed some part of myself. In fact, I kind of have to expose myself a little bit in order to make that cut. So if my opponent is quite quick and sees that I've hesitated here, they can then rise over my blade here, push it down, and hit me with a timing strike, just as I'm trying to make that deception. So here, when I pause and hesitate to decide which side to go on, they can immediately hit with that timing hit. So a timing hit, generally speaking, is going to be effective against feinting, against deception. So timing against deception. Now, on the contrary, if I'm doing a parry riposte, and my opponent comes up on this side, that's exactly what I'm trying to entice. By flipping my sword here to make this deceptive action, I'm trying to get my opponent to go into an outside guard or to drop his guard like this. And so he guards himself on his outside, and then I cut to his inside. So a parry riposte is going to be weak against deception, because a parry riposte relies on a certain action being completed, which is the parry, for the following action to happen, which is the riposte. So the parry riposte is weak against a deception. The timing drill, or the timing attack, is strong against a deception. Now, the timing attack, though, is strong against a deception because the deceiver is out of time. Whether you're standing here and you deceive a move this way in order to attack on this side, or whether you're standing here and you're making that same feint action and deceiving in that way, you're out of time when you do that. When I make the step here, I should have cut, and now I'm on borrowed time as I cut over here. So I rely on being out of time, which gives the person who's doing the timing cut enough room to be able to do what they're doing. So you can also do a deception this way by making it difficult to see how far away I am, by denying you that usual line of sight, which is my sword in front of me. I can deceive you about how far away we are, but if your timing is excellent and you know your distance, you'll still be able to close in without the sword there as a measure. So the timing relies on that little gap that's made by a deception to hit that gap with a cut. If you don't have that, the timing cut is going to be very hard to do, and especially hard if the person is mentally prepared for a certain thing, which is what you're doing with a parry riposte. So if I'm here and I'm prepared to make a parry riposte, and you try to make a timing cut over my blade against my hand, but I've already prepared an outside half hanger as what I want to do to move into the next maneuver, and you try and push over my blade on the outside, boom, outside half hanger, it screws up everything that you were trying to do with that timing cut, and then I can make that cut. So whatever it is you're trying to do with the timing cut relies on a little gap of time that is specifically denied by a proper parry riposte that's in good time. Also, if you're preparing a parry riposte, you're going to make sure your distance away from your opponent is exactly correct, so that you can have time to receive the cut and have time to make your own cut. So you're going to be in very good time if you're set on a parry riposte. It's going to be very hard to exploit bad timing, unless A, you're bad at distance, or B, you're very slow. And so that's the only way you're going to be able to use a timing cut against someone who's prepared a parry riposte. So timing cuts, good against deceptions, bad against parry riposte. And lastly, parry riposte comes in a circle, so it explains itself. A parry riposte, as we know, is already bad against feints. We know that because when you make a feint, when you make a deception, the parry riposte relies on that being completed in order to make the next attack. So here I am receiving the blow. Oh shoot, I haven't received the blow yet. I'm only prepared to make a cut and my elbow's exposed, which is exactly what he was going for. So he deceived me on this side, came onto this side, and well, I was preparing to make a cut. So best case scenario for me is a double. But that's obviously not a good scenario anyway. So that's why the parry riposte concept or category is poor against feints, and we've already discussed why it's good against timing cuts, because if you're in good time, you're focused on your timing, and you're prepared for what's coming, you can parry an incoming timing cut and then make your riposte in time. So that's the basic concept. That's the theoretical framework why these three categories work against each other. The problem is, it's hard to play this game while you're in the middle of a match, right? So when you're in the middle of a match and someone does a feint, you're not going to think, oh, well, a feint, let me think about it, I should use a timing cut. No, because the whole purpose of the timing cut is it needs to be super fast, with no gap, with no false time between the thing happening and you thinking about it and then you doing it. So you need to drill these responses to each other, and then in the setting of the tournament, your coach will tell you, so-and-so does a lot of this particular deception, so-and-so does a lot of this thing, here's how to counter it. Or if you encounter a maneuver that you've never encountered before, say you're fighting a left-handed person or you're fighting a saberist, someone who has maneuvers that you haven't trained against, at the moment in the tournament, your coach can say to you, listen, I don't really know what they're doing, I don't really train on that particular maneuver, however, conceptually, it's a timing attack. So conceptually, you should be able to use a parry riposte against it. And it will give you a tool that you can use to overcome new things that you find in your tournaments. So that's the basic framework, and then we're going to go over each of those things in detail, and we're going to discuss how to train. Okay, on to training. We have three basic maneuvers that we're going to be training, and those are from an outside guard, we're going to be rising over the sword, and then in our middle guard, we're going to be choosing between hitting on the outside or the inside. That's a deception. To counter that, our timing attack will be also from the outside guard. When they rise up to make that action in the middle guard, what you're going to do is overcome the middle guard and snap at their head. And then we have the parry riposte, when someone is an outside guard and they attempt to rise up your guard and collapse it and snap at your head, just like we did with the timing. What we're going to do is we are going to shed into a St. George's guard as they try and rise over the top there, and we're going to parry that, and then we're going to riposte with a number 4 across the face. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 across the face. 5, 6, 8. So number 5 across the middle of the head. So again, outside guard, deception into the middle guard, choose which side to take. Outside guard, rise over the guard, snap to the head. Outside guard, receive the cut to the head in St. George, snap to 5. So those are the three maneuvers that we're going to be facing off against each other. Now, let's get started with that deception. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to say that we're engaged in some blade action here, and what we're going to do is we are going to raise the sword into our middle guard without moving our feet, and then we're going to snap in to third, like that. So here's our stance in second position. We're going to rise up here and cut to third. And then we're going to rise up here and cut to 6. And then we're going to rise up here and cut to 5 again, and rise at 5, and rise at 6, okay? So what I want you to do is I want you to follow along with your sword, and I want you to try and keep that action fairly tight. I want you to follow with me, and I'm going to call either 5, which comes from the outside towards your inside, or 6, which comes from the inside towards your outside, okay? So I'm going to choose one of those two, 5 or 6, and you're going to make the cut, okay? So we'll start off just in our second position, in our outside guard, and I want you to snap up and 5. Snap and 6, 5, snap and 5, snap and 6, snap and 5, snap and 6, snap and 5, snap and 6, snap and 6, snap and 6, snap and 5. Okay, so that's the basic principle of what we're doing. Now I want you to try something a little bit different. I want you to grab your sword. I want you to face off against the screen if you can. If you can't and you need to have the screen beside you, that's fine too, but I want you to look at my body language. Now, when you snap, when I say snap up into a middle guard over the edge of my sword, and you're leaning to one side or the other, I'm either going to throw an outside guard here, and I'm going to be dramatic about it to help you guys out, I'm either going to throw an outside guard here, or I'm going to close up with an inside guard here. And I want you to hit the opposite side. So I'll snap, and here, I want you to swing that cut number 5 here. Or I'll snap and tighten up here, which is not the correct thing for me to be doing, but it's good for you to make that cut right here. Okay? So we're going to start with that. And we'll start here, and you snap, I guard, and you should have come in on this side. We'll do it one more time slowly. You snap, I guard, and you should have come in on that side. Okay? So get ready to go here. We're in an outside guard against each other, and snap, guard, snap, guard, snap, guard, snap, 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 and one more. There we go. So try and get those cuts in and try and make sure that they hit in the correct spot. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to work on different footwork. Here we are in our outside guard, and we're in our second position. Sometimes you'll be presented with the opportunity to make this feint in a different position. So as someone closes in and shuffles, you'll be stepping on your way back, but you don't want to retreat. So from here, the snap, you'll spook them, and then you'll make the cut into second or third. So from first position, I want you to bring it up and cut. From first position, bring it up and cut. From first, here we go. Here we are in first, boom, just like that. There we go. Remember, you're in first, make the snap, make the cut. In first, snap and cut. There we go. There it is. Excellent. So that's our basic deception. We're bringing that sword up from an outside guard here. We're bringing it up for an attack. Maybe it's coming over here, and then it comes over there. So that's the basic concept that we're working with. So what I want you to do is practice that in second, going out to third. I want you to practice that in first, going out all the way to third. And I want you to practice that on a lunge, which is to say snap forward and then lunge for the attack. Okay? And the reason is your opponent may, as part of, especially if they're kind of a retreating kind of person, they may have slipped back into a guard to defend themselves, and you may not be able to quite reach them with your true action. So if you're a little bit out of time, you can go from second position, come into third like this, and give them a tell of which side you want to go on, and then they think they're safe because they're far enough away, so you make a further lunge to where you're supposed to be. Okay? So from second position, an outside guard, and we're coming up as we step forward into third, up, and then lunge forward. Up and lunge forward. Up and lunge forward. There we go. And so that's another piece of footwork that we can use. So we've gone from second to third, we've gone from first to third, and we've gone from second to third to lunge. And those are the 3 ways that we've expressed that same action. Now I want you guys to practice as many of those as you can, okay? Including on the advance, which is to say that we advance our back leg when we make the deception, and then we step into third. That's even farther. And of course you can always shuffle to advance to a lunge, or you can do a long advance like this to a lunge. You can go quite far with any of these pieces of footwork, and of course you can always come from first to second, very short as well. So here we are, we deceive them into second, without moving, and then we cut into second. So you can make it very short, and you can make it very long. And that's a key point in our next segment, which is going to be timing, figuring out the length that you can move is a key point of timing. All right, we've got a fresh new battery in the camera, and we're ready to go for our timing and our Parry Riposte version of these same things. So if someone is making that deception against you, they're here in second, they snap up without coming into third, they just snap up on this side, and you think they're going to make this cut, but then they make that cut. This is a deception. Now, while they're doing that, they snap up here, and they decide what they're doing. Okay? I want you to overtake their sword up here, push down, and hit them in the head. Okay? And the way to do that is you're on an outside guard, they snap up there, and I want you to just slide your sword up to overtake them and snap down on the head. Okay? So you're starting by moving your sword this way, and then you're snapping at the head. Okay, so that's the action that we're taking, and while we're doing that, we're just stepping, I'll show you the footwork, we're stepping into third. So here we are, and all we're doing is stepping into a nice, easy third, and we're going to lean, okay? So here we are, our normal third is like this, boom, boom, and I'm gonna show you another little piece of the footwork, which is to just extend this back leg, tip your body, try and make this line straight, like this, and just lean in like that. Okay, and you're going to collapse that just like you do with a lunge. So you're going to push out there, you're going to collapse the back leg, and you're going to rock back on that, okay? So this is another piece of footwork that you can do with the deception as well. So I'll show you with the deception, all you're doing is you're deceiving on this side, possibly with a third. So you step into third to make it very convincing, and then you lean to make the cut. Okay, so this is our forward lean that we can also work on. It works with the deception. We're going to do it on the timing drill right now. So you raise the hand up over the sword, you overcome their fort, and then you drop it down to make the cut. Okay, and you want to make sure, as always, that your cut is landing on the target when your foot hits. Cut landing as your foot hits. So that's the basic concept. You want that force to hit in that way. So you're up the target here, lean forward like that. Boom, boom, collapse that back leg back. Just like that. Okay, up and down, just like that. Up and down, there we go. Down, and try and get that lean in there as well to get a little bit of extra length. Okay, so what that looks like from the front is I'm rising up and cutting down like that. Boom, boom. And as you can see, I've got a pretty good reach on how to get forward on that, despite only stepping to third. Because of that lean forward, I have a pretty good reach on how far I can go. So that is what you're going to use against that deception. As soon as they pop up, you're going to lean forward and snap it like that. Snap it, and then you're going to get out of town, because you don't want to be sitting there leaning forward like this while they've got their sword back in action. So here we are. Cut, get out of town. Cut, get out of town. Cut, get out of town. Okay? So that's what you're going to do. I'm going to be performing the deception against you, and you're going to make the call when you're ready to make that cut. So here we are in an outside guard. You're in an outside guard as well. Okay? I'm going to snap up to a middle guard and come on this side. Okay? You're going to use this weak position of my sword, and you're going to bring your sword down on my head on the inside. You can also do it on the outside because this position is so weak, and I'm trying to fake you out. But it's not a very strong guard that I have in either of those positions. When I rise up over here to make this cut on this side, you can simply bring your sword up over top and hit me on my way in. So when we're ready, I'm going to make the cut, and you return it to me. And again, return it to me. Good job. There we go. And another one. Good job. There it is. Just like that. There we go. Excellent. So good job, guys. That's the basic principle behind that. So as you can see, this timing drill is very effective against this particular deception. Of course, I pick a series of timing and deception drills that are effective against each other to underscore the point. So as soon as I make that adjustment, you snap it. Now, it's not necessarily the case that I'm making a cut from here in my outside guard second position, and I'm making my deception in second, and then I'm stepping my cut into third. That's not necessarily the case. As we showed before, I could deceive into this guard, and then I can cut very far into that guard, or into that cut. So it's not necessarily the case that you'll be able to snap that deception from second to third like that. You might need to reach into your opponent to do that. Or you might need to keep your distance in case he's ready to make a very strong lunge, or you've backed him into a corner and he doesn't have very far to move. You might need to keep your distance in order to make that cut. So we're going to explore this timing cut, just like we did with the deception, with different footwork. So here we are in second, outside, rising up and cutting into third. But we can also rise up as we gather, as we advance, and we can cut into third from there. Right? So here we are again in our second position, coming over his sword like this, and then cutting him and making sure he doesn't escape us. Right? So if you have a very flighty opponent, rise up here, cut here, and back. Rise up here, cut here. There we go. Now this isn't a deception, so it's all one movement, like that. Okay? You're just trying to catch somebody who's running away from you. There we go. Boom, just like that. Okay? And towards you, I'm rising up your sword and cutting there. So I'm quite far, rising up and cutting there. So you can make this cut traveling quite the distance as well. Now similarly, you can make this cut with barely moving. You can slip and rise your sword. Slip, boom. Slip, boom. So you're actually not moving at all. Your body weight shouldn't move very much when you do a slip. You should already be fairly far back, so you shouldn't be jarring backwards. So you can slip here, cut there, and make that. Now make sure this is not a parry riposte, right? This isn't a unicorn guard followed by a cut, right? This is a cut that is rising over their weight of their sword. Boom, just like that. Okay? So you can practice that with the step and lean. You can practice that with the the advance here and step into third. You can practice just as we did before with a second, third lunge. And so you can practice with all the same footwork that we were using before. We'll move on to Parry Riposte now. All right, last but not least, we're going to get into Parry Riposte, which should be nice and easy for you guys. All we're going to do is from the outside guard, gather ourselves into St. George, and we're going to make that cut, boom. So from outside, St. George, cut. Outside, St. George, cut, okay? So that's all I want you to do, St. George, and then a cut number one. Nice and easy, boom, boom. Now, if this person against us is using the timing attack that we just did, we're in our outside guard, they try and rise over our guard and collapse our guard. But instead, we rise ourselves up to a St. George and we retreat, which means that we're farther down their sword, we're farther away from them, which means it's going to be fort against weak. They're going to be losing this fight, and they're not going to make that cut against our head. So here's our St. George guard guarding us against that, and then we step forward into that first cut to basically do the same thing against them. But this is not a really fancy blade action. All it is outside guard, St. George, cut. Outside guard, St. George, cut. Okay, that's all I want from you guys at this point. And this is why we teach this to our beginners, right? Start with Parry Riposte and then get into the fancy stuff later. Okay, this will save you from a lot of fancy stuff. So what's the point in learning the fancy stuff if this is going to save you anything? Okay, right now, I hope you guys are following along while I'm talking, staying as active as much as possible. Try and keep that heart rate going. So here we are in our classic Parry Riposte footwork, which involves the slip, and then the step into third, and the step back into second to reset. So second position, first position, third position, second position, first position, third position, second, first, third, second, first, third. Okay? It's all in a nice clean measure, and it's all in nice clean footwork. That's why we like to teach it to beginners, and that's why it's effective. If you start messing up with the footwork too much, you're going to open yourself up to false time, and that it won't work against timing attacks anymore. So we can, using proper measure and proper footwork, we can use different footwork though, okay? So we don't have to necessarily go second, first, third, and in some cases it's not going to be effective. For example, very simply, if our opponent is being kind of hostile or being kind of forward, we might find that second to first to second again, because they're very close, might be just as effective. Or if they've retreated after we've made the cut and they've sort of dived out of the way, we might find that we have to lunge to get them on the way out, which is perfectly good footwork, and there's nothing wrong with that. So here we are on our second position, first position, lunge to make the cut, fall out back into second, okay? And first, and lunge, and second, and first, and lunge, and second, and first, and lunge, okay? Keeping nice, good time, because this is supposed to work with good timing. There we go, and lunge, and second, first, and lunge, and one more, second, first, and lunge, okay? Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. So that's what we're going to be doing for our Parry Riposte. Now,
There are other footworks as well that you can use. For example, if your opponent is keeping his distance on purpose, he's being a little deceptive with his distance. This is especially true of someone who's using distance instead of time. So they're trying to psych you out in how far away you are from each other, and they're using extremely long lunges to make things happen. That's still timing, it's not deception. It's still timing when you're using the distance to your advantage. So you might find that you'll gather into St. George, and then you'll cut. Okay? So here we are, second, first, third, and back. Second, first, third, and back. Second, first, third, and back. Okay? So this is against somebody who's not pushing against you enough, and they're trying to use that great distance or a huge reach maybe that they have to get you. So again, first in St. George, cut here and back. Cut and back. Okay, so those are the basics. Keep in mind, just like with anything else, we can exchange any of the footwork we want. So in our timing drill, we just learned about that forward lean. Same thing, you might go from here on an outside guard. They might make a kind of a weak attempt against you, and you might find that you can actually step into third while they make that weak attempt and go into St. George like this, forward, right? So you're here, you guard St. George there, and then you pop that lean forward to get them, right? So outside guard, small step, but you're keeping your weight back, and then to get them, you're leaning forward like that. So that's all you're doing. Small step, leaning forward. Small step, leaning forward. And remember, these are two actions. 1, 2, because you're using a parry riposte. Parry riposte. Okay? And there we go, parry riposte. There it is. And stepping forward to the parry and riposte. Okay? So that is not a timing action because you're using very standard timing and you're understanding your timing very well. Okay? You're not using an extremely elongated lunge. You're not using any sort of deceptive footwork or timing. You're on time, you're in rhythm, and you're in the proper spaces. You're just choosing which spaces to be using correctly, okay? So that's a little bit of a confusion you might have between the category of timing when it involves extremely long actions or the category of parry riposte, right? You're also talking about making sure that the time that you're using, the time signature, so to speak, is correct. So this opponent is, if they're only using the time of the wrist to cut that hand up like this, then you have to only use the time of the wrist as well. So retreating full back into St. George like this is not going to be useful to you, right? You have to match their time, use that timing of the wrist, keep your footwork steady, and then cut using a proper timing of the body to make that cut. So you're using proper time all the time, okay? That's the difference between a parry riposte and a timing attack. And that will prove effective against all manner of timing attacks. If you see someone who likes to use their long reach to their advantage, some sort of disconnect where they are faster than you, they're taller than you, or they're taking advantage of the fact that you guys are in false time, that's when you want to sync up your timing, get it really regimented and get it really solid, and make sure that you can use parry riposte attacks against them effectively so that you're set and ready to go. And then of course, unfortunately, with this attack, going up into St. George, going into St. George here, moving forward into St. George, none of these are going to be helpful if this person is deceiving you. If they deceive you on this side, and you go up into St. George, you open both ways, right? So this is why I chose this particular parry riposte, because it demonstrates that this parry riposte is going to be slightly weak to deception. So as soon as I come up here and choose which side to go on, but you think maybe you misread this to be this timing attack that we're using, or an attack 7 at the head, and so you go into St. George, well, now you're open on both sides. So it's just a buffet for someone who's using deception against someone. Plus, because you're in such good regimented time and distance, you're open to that deception because that person, as you come up, they're going to hesitate now, and they're going to strike when you're up, and when you're moving forward to come back down. So they're going to make that strike off time, and they're going to hit you with that deception. So that's how deceptions beat parry riposte, and why deceptions are great against timing attacks. That's why timing attacks beat deceptions, but they're good against parry riposte, and that's why parry riposte is very good against timing attacks but it's weak against deception. So hopefully with those 3 drills, you guys can firmly understand the relationship between those 3 concepts, and you can start applying those in your fencing. Also, you can take anything that we've learned, any sets of actions or any plays that we've learned, and you can use those different sets of footwork, right? So you can use the classic step back into first and then forward into third. You can step into third, you can lean, right? You can go from second into a lunge and then back into first position. So hopefully you guys can mix up your footwork with all of the drills that you know, and you can take virtually any amount of time to try any of your drills. We're going to be doing a lot more of these more interactive and more active drills in the future. So I hope you guys stick around, and we'll see you guys next week.